He made him wait 3 hours for a humiliation he'd designed a decade earlier. This is the story of a single father, a CEO who believed she held all the power, and the moment a broken machine revealed that the most valuable person in the room was the one she'd dismissed without a glance. A story about desperation, hidden expertise, and the quiet revenge of knowing you built the very thing they cannot fix without you. The father was Alex Chen, an engineer turned desperate applicant after layoffs gutted his industry. The CEO was Elena Vance, whose new automated factory was about to fail spectacularly. This is what happens when the person you believe holds no value is the only one who understands the value of what you've built. When the central machine, the heart of her $10 million operation, shuddered to a stop, she would have to ask for help from the man she'd left waiting in a plastic chair for 3 hours. For Alex Chen, the plastic chair in the waiting room wasn't just uncomfortable, it was the latest in a long line of humiliations he'd endured to keep the lights on for his 7-year-old daughter, Chloe. 18 months earlier, he had been a senior systems engineer at Norwood Industrial, a respected name in precision manufacturing. He specialized in harmonic calibration for the Atlas series of assembly robots, machines that could build everything from car engines to medical devices with micrometer precision. His team had designed the Atlas 10, a revolutionary model that used machine learning to self-correct its welding arms. It was his baby. He'd spent 3 years on the schematics, the testing, the endless nights debugging code. The patent bore his name as a primary contributor. But when Norwood was acquired by a larger conglomerate in a move to consolidate the market, the entire engineering department was deemed redundant. Alex was given 2 weeks, severance for every year of service, and a non-disclosure agreement that felt less like a document and more like a gag order. The layoffs had gutted the industrial corridor. 200 engineers and technicians found themselves competing for a handful of jobs overnight. Alex sent out over 80 resumes in the first month. He got 3 interviews. Each one ended with some variation of the same polite dismissal. Overqualified. We're looking for someone with more recent experience in cloud integration. Your background is impressive, but not quite the right fit. The savings account he and his wife had carefully built evaporated in 6 months, paying for Chloe's asthma medication, the rent on their 2-bedroom apartment, and groceries that seemed to get more expensive every week. Then his wife, Linda, decided she couldn't do it anymore. The stress, the constant financial panic, the sight of a brilliant engineer folding cardboard boxes for a grocery delivery service just to make the copay on a doctor's visit. She left one Tuesday afternoon with a single suitcase, saying she needed to find herself, leaving Alex with a stunned 7-year-old and a mountain of bills. That was 9 months ago. Since then, Alex's world had shrunk to a relentless calculus of survival. He took the night shift at a fulfillment warehouse, scanning packages until his vision blurred. He delivered food on his bicycle during the day, with Chloe sitting patiently in a child's seat on the back, her small arms wrapped around his waist as he weaved through traffic. He sold his engineering textbooks, then his late father's watch, then the professional-grade soldering iron he'd used to build prototypes. The one thing he refused to sell was his old Norwood work laptop, locked in a closet. It contained every schematic, every line of code for the Atlas series. It was proof, he told himself, that the person he used to be had actually existed. The job listing for Vance Precision Manufacturing had appeared like a mirage, maintenance technician for automated assembly line. It didn't require a degree, just experience with industrial robotics. The pay was modest, but it was day shift, and it included health insurance. For Alex, it was a lifeline. He could be home for Chloe after school. He could afford her inhalers without begging the pharmacy for an extension. He spent 2 nights meticulously tailoring his resume, downplaying his engineering titles and highlighting his hands-on calibration work. He needed to look like a technician, not the man who designed the very technology he'd be maintaining. Arrived at the Vance facility 20 minutes early, wearing the only clean, presentable clothes he owned, faded jeans and a gray work jacket over a simple collared shirt. He'd polished his old work boots. The reception area was a study in sterile corporate ambition. Sleek gray walls, a massive logo behind the desk, and a smell of industrial cleaner overlaid with expensive coffee. The receptionist, a young man with a headset, took his name without looking up. "Ms. Vance will see you shortly." "Have a seat." The shortly stretched into an hour. Alex watched other applicants, younger, dressed in crisp new shirts, get ushered back into the office complex. He heard muffled voices, the occasional laugh. He checked his phone, calculating how long the bus fare would last if this didn't work out. At the 90-minute mark, the receptionist offered him a small bottle of water. "She's running behind. Big product launch today." Alex nodded, his stomach tightening. He could see Elena Vance through the glass wall of her corner office. She was a striking woman in her late 30s, with long blonde hair swept over one shoulder. She moved with a kinetic, impatient energy, packing during phone calls, gesturing sharply at reports on her desk. The articles he'd skimmed online called her a disruptor. She'd taken over her father's traditional machine shop and, through a combination of ruthless cost-cutting and aggressive automation, transformed it into Vance Precision, a supplier for major automotive companies. Her signature move was replacing seasoned machinists with automated systems, boasting to trade magazines about her lean, AI-driven workforce. She was photographed at galas, not on factory floors. 2 hours and 45 minutes into his wait, Alex saw her finally glance toward the waiting area. Her eyes, a cool blue, scanned him with a look of detached appraisal, like she was checking the specs on a piece of equipment. She didn't smile. She said something to an assistant, then turned back to her computer screen. Another 15 minutes passed. The humiliation was no longer an accident, it was a tactic. He was being tested for compliance, for how much meaningless discomfort he would endure for a chance at a job that paid $18 an hour. This was the moment the narrative always sells you, the boiling point, the righteous anger, but Alex felt only a hollow chill. Anger was a luxury. Anger didn't pay for Chloe's new glasses, which she desperately needed after squinting at the whiteboard in class. Anger didn't put food on the table, so he sat. He watched the minute hand on the wall clock tick forward. He thought about the peanut butter sandwich he'd packed for Chloe's lunch and hoped it was enough. Inside her office, Elena Vance was fighting her own battle. The big product launch wasn't a triumph, it was a disaster in the making. The flagship client, a major electric vehicle maker, was on site for the final sign-off on a batch of drive unit housings. Their entire new model line depended on these parts being perfect. The order represented 40% of Vance Precision's projected revenue for the year. And the heart of the production line, the massive, brand-new Atlas 10 assembly robot, was behaving erratically. It had been installed 6 months prior, the crown jewel of her automation push. It was supposed to be the solution to human error, to union demands, to the vagaries of skilled labor. She'd paid over $2 million for it, financing the purchase against future orders. For months, it had performed flawlessly. But this morning, during the final validation run for the client, the robot's primary welding arm had begun to shudder. A high-pitched whine echoed through the factory floor. The control panel showed a cascade of error codes her technicians didn't recognize. The client's lead engineer, a man with a perpetually skeptical frown, was now looking at his watch. Elena had spent the last 3 hours on the phone with Norwood's support line, being transferred between departments, put on hold, and finally told that the senior specialist for the Atlas 10 was out sick and the earliest they could dispatch someone was tomorrow afternoon. Tomorrow was too late. The client would leave. The contract would evaporate. Her investors would ask questions she couldn't answer. The pressure was a physical weight on her temples. Her carefully constructed image of effortless, tech-driven control was cracking, and she could feel the gaze of every employee in the building, waiting to see her fail. This is where the two worlds, built on the same technology but separated by a chasm of power, were about to collide. Alex Chen, the designer, sat forgotten in a lobby, thinking about his daughter's glasses. Elena Vance, the owner, stood in her office, staring at the machine she'd bought but didn't understand as it began to smoke. And deep within the robot's core programming, a legacy subroutine written by a desperate young engineer years ago, a failsafe for a specific harmonic imbalance, began to flash a warning no one in the building was left who could read. The first wisp of acrid smoke curled from the Atlas 10's main housing at exactly 11:17 a.m. A technician yelled. The client's engineer took a step back, reaching for his phone. Elena's assistant burst into her office, face pale. "Ms. Vance, it's the Atlas. It's not just an error, it's seizing. We think it's going to burn out its main actuator." Elena's composure shattered. "What does that mean? Fix it." "We can't. The error codes, they're not in the manual. The Norwood guy won't be here until tomorrow." The factory manager, an old-school machinist named Frank who'd survived the automation purge by keeping his head down, appeared at the doorway. His hands were stained with grease. "Boss," he said, his voice low, "that's a Legacy Atlas 10, the early model, the one with the proprietary harmonic dampeners. If that actuator goes, it'll take the main spindle with it. Repair bill will be over 300,000, downtime months." The blood drained from Elena's face. 300,000 was one thing. Months of downtime would bankrupt her. She looked from Frank's grim expression to the panicked technician to the client who was now clearly filming the smoking machine with his phone. Her empire, built on the promise of flawless machines, was literally burning up in front of her. Frank cleared his throat, glancing uncomfortably toward the waiting area. "There might be one other option. It's a long shot." "Anything what?" Elena snapped. Frank nodded toward the glass. "The guy waiting out there, Chen, his resume, he listed Norwood, said he worked on calibration for the Atlas series." Elena's eyes flicked to the man in the worn jacket, sitting with a patience that now seemed ominous. "So, he's a technician. We need the engineer who designed it." Frank met her gaze, and for the first time there was no deference in it. "Ma'am, I ran his name through an old industry database before he got here, just due diligence. Alexander Chen wasn't just on the calibration team at Norwood." He paused, letting the truth hang in the smoky air. "He was the lead design engineer on the Atlas 10 project. His signature is on the original schematics. He built the thing." The silence that followed Frank's words wasn't just an absence of sound. It was the sound of Elena Vance's entire worldview cracking open. She stared at the factory manager, her mind trying to reconcile the image of the patient, worn man in the lobby with the lead engineer on her most critical asset. The cognitive dissonance was physical, a wave of nausea. She had left the architect of her empire waiting for 3 hours like a nuisance. "That's impossible," she whispered, but even as she said it, she knew it was. The look on Frank's face said he'd double-checked. The proof was in the database, in the schematics, in the very machine now filling her factory with the scent of burning insulation. Her first instinct was corporate, transactional, damage control. "Bring him in now." The command was sharp, but her voice wavered. Frank didn't move. He stood his ground, a flicker of something like satisfaction in his eyes. He'd watched her replace men like him with screens and software. "You might want to go get him yourself, Ms. Vance, given the circumstances." The walk from her glass-walled office to the sterile waiting area felt like crossing a mile of broken glass. Every employee they passed had stopped pretending to work. They were watching the Atlas 10 smoke, watching their boss stride toward the man she'd ignored, watching the unspoken power dynamic in the room invert in real time. Alex Chen hadn't moved. He was still sitting, hands on his knees, but his posture had changed. He was no longer slumping in patient resignation. He was perfectly still, like a spring coiled. He'd heard the commotion, seen the smoke. He recognized the specific, unhealthy pitch of the actuator whine. He knew exactly what was happening to his machine. Elena stopped in front of him. Up close, she could see the fine lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the careful mend on the shoulder of his jacket, the quiet dignity that poverty hadn't been able to strip away. It unnerved her. She was used to people who needed something from her. This man did not look like he needed anything. He looked like a judge. "Mr. Chen," her voice was tighter than she intended. "There seems to be a critical issue with one of our assembly robots. Frank informs me you have experience with the Atlas series." Alex looked up at her. He didn't stand. He held her gaze for a beat too long, letting the absurd understatement of experience hang in the air. "I've worked on them," he said, his voice calm, flat. "We have a situation. The machine is failing. Our client is here. We need it operational immediately." She was laying out demands, but they sounded like pleas. Alex's eyes drifted past her, through the glass, to the smoking robot on the factory floor. He watched a technician poke at the control panel with a confused expression. "Error code 701?" he asked. without looking back at her. Elena turned to Frank, who nodded grimly, and 703, then a cascade. A flicker of something, recognition, concern, crossed Alex's face. The cascade means the harmonic dampener has already failed. The main actuator is overheating. If it seizes, it'll warp the primary spindle. You're looking at a total core replacement. He stated it as simple fact, the way a doctor might deliver a terminal diagnosis. You have about 15 minutes before the thermal runaway is irreversible. The client's engineer chose that moment to march over, his phone still in hand. Elena, this is unacceptable. We have production schedules. If this machine is down, our entire line is down. We need guarantees or we walk and sue for breach. Elena's carefully constructed composure was a thread fraying by the second. She looked from the furious client to the implacable man in the chair. The solution was sitting right in front of her, but accessing it would require a surrender she wasn't prepared to make. "Mr. Chen," she said, forcing a tone of professional courtesy that rang hollow, "we would be willing to compensate you for your consultation if you could take a look." Alex finally stood up. He wasn't tall, but he had a solid, grounded presence. He looked at Elena, then at the client, then back at the machine. "I don't consult," he said quietly, "but I can fix it." The relief that washed over Elena was instantly shattered by his next sentence. "But we need to discuss my terms first." He didn't say it with malice or triumph. He said it with the weary practicality of a man who'd been burned too many times. This wasn't revenge, it was a contract negotiation. And for the first time in a decade, Elena Vance was not holding the pen. She gestured sharply toward her office. "Fine, in here quickly." The three of them, Elena, Alex, and a bewildered Frank, entered the office. Elena closed the glass door, but it did nothing to mute the dozens of eyes watching them. She remained standing behind her desk, a barrier of polished walnut between her and the man she'd underestimated. "Name your price for the repair, an hourly rate, a bonus, be reasonable." Alex didn't sit in the guest chair. He walked slowly to the window overlooking the factory floor, his back to her. He watched his creation suffer. "When I designed the dampening system for the Atlas 10, he began, his voice distant, "we encountered this exact failure mode during stress testing. A flaw in the third-party cooling manifold. It couldn't handle sustained high-torque operations. We specified a custom, higher-grade unit. It added 12% to the unit cost." He turned to face her. "Norwood's management overrode us. They went with the cheaper manifold to hit a price point for early buyers. I wrote the failure warning into the diagnostic software myself. Error 701, it means, replace the cooling manifold immediately." He paused, letting the implication sink in. "Your machine didn't just break down today, Ms. Vance. It's been telling you it was going to break for months. Your technicians just didn't speak the language." Elena's mind raced. The maintenance logs. There had been recurring, minor error codes that her new, less experienced techs had dismissed as glitches. They'd done the basic resets, the manual said it was fine, and the machine had kept running until it couldn't. She had prioritized cost over expertise, and now the bill was due. "The terms," Alex repeated, bringing her back, "are not just about money." "Then what?" Elena snapped, her patience gone. "First, the job, the maintenance technician position. You offer it to me now, full benefits, a living wage, not a contract, direct hire." "Done," Elena said immediately. It was the easiest concession. "Second, you hire back Frank here as the full floor manager, with final say on all machine maintenance and a 20% raise. He's the only one you kept who knows that machines aren't just software." Frank's eyes widened. Elena bristled. This was encroachment on her authority. "My staffing decisions are not your concern." Alex's expression didn't change. "You're right, my concern is fixing that machine, and when I do, I won't be here to babysit it. Frank will. He's the insurance policy. Take it or watch your $2 million asset turn into a paperweight." Elena's jaw tightened. She gave a single, sharp nod. "Fine, Frank, you're reinstated with the raise." "Third," Alex said, and now he took a step toward her desk. "You call the local technical college. Today, you set up a paid apprenticeship program. You sponsor 5 students a year from this community to learn real mechanical and systems engineering. not just button pushing. You invest in the people you've been replacing. This was a bridge too far. It was a structural change, an admission that her entire business philosophy was flawed. That's a significant operational change. I can't just. You can, Alex interrupted, his voice hardening for the first time. Or you can explain to your investors why your flagship machine is scrap and your biggest client is gone. I'm not negotiating. I'm telling you the cost of my help. The client engineer, still loitering by the door, cleared his throat. Elena, we don't have time for corporate social responsibility debates. Either the machine runs in an hour or we leave. The clock was the ultimate negotiator. Elena Vance, the disruptor, was being disrupted. The man with the real power wasn't the one in the corner office, it was the one who understood the gears. She felt the last of her leverage dissolve. All right, she said, the word tasting like ash. All of it, now please fix it. Alex didn't smile, he simply nodded. I'll need my tools and access to the machine's command terminal with administrator privileges. Whatever you need. As Alex turned to leave the office, Elena spoke again, the question tearing out of her against her will. Why are you here applying for a job like this with your background? Alex stopped at the door. He looked back at her, and for a fleeting second, she saw the profound fatigue beneath the resolve. Because engineers design the future, Ms. Vance, but we still have to pay for our children's present. Then he was gone, striding onto the factory floor toward the ailing robot, with Frank following like a loyal lieutenant. What happened next was a masterclass in applied knowledge. Alex didn't rush. He approached the Atlas 10 with a familiarity that was almost intimate. He placed a hand on its housing, feeling the vibration. He listened. He then went to the control terminal, brushed aside the flustered technician, and began typing with a speed that betrayed his deep familiarity with the system. Lines of code scrolled by. He bypassed the standard user interface entirely, accessing the proprietary engineering backend. The factory floor fell silent, the only sounds the frantic whine of the actuator and the steady clack of Alex's fingers on the keyboard. He called out commands to Frank and the other techs in a calm, clear voice. Shut down power to quadrant 3. I need the maintenance panel on the east side opened. There will be a secondary coolant line behind the primary manifold. I need it clamped. Now. They scrambled to obey. He was a conductor, and the machine was his orchestra. Elena watched from the office, her phone buzzing with ignored calls from investors. She was paralyzed. Her fate, the fate of her company, was now in the hands of the single dad she'd tried to make wait 4 hours for an interview. The humiliation was complete, but it was no longer about her. It was about whether he could do what he claimed. Inside the machine, Alex found exactly what he knew he would. The cheap, stock cooling manifold had developed a hairline crack. Superheated hydraulic fluid was leaking onto the actuator housing, causing the overheating and the cascade failure. The fix was not simple. They couldn't replace the part in time. But Alex had designed a workaround for this exact scenario, a software patch that would reroute coolant through a secondary, emergency pathway and drastically reduce the machine's operational speed to prevent further damage. It was a band-aid, but it would get the machine running long enough to fulfill the client's order and allow for a proper repair later. He uploaded the patch, a piece of code he'd written years ago and hoped never to use. The system rebooted. The warning lights on the control panel blinked from red to yellow. The high-pitched whine dropped to a low hum. The smoke ceased. The robot's main welding arm, which had been frozen in place, slowly retracted to its home position. A collective exhale went through the factory. The client's engineer, his phone now lowered, stepped forward and examined the control readout. The error codes were gone. The machine was in a safe, operational mode. Can it run the validation cycle? He asked, skepticism still dominant. At 60% capacity, Alex said, wiping his hands on a rag. It'll be slow, but it will produce parts within tolerance. It will hold for 48 hours. Then you need to install the correct manifold. He handed Frank a scribbled note with the exact part number from the original, rejected specs. The client's engineer looked from Alex to Elena, who had now ventured onto the floor. Run the cycle, the engineer said. They did the Atlas 10 word to life, its movements slightly slower but precise and steady. It picked up a raw housing, positioned it, and began its welding sequence. Sparks flew, but they were controlled, rhythmic. After 5 minutes, it produced a finished part. The client's engineer took it, measured it with a digital caliper, and compared it to the blueprint. He nodded. It's within spec. The tension didn't break, it shifted. The immediate fire was out, but the structural damage to Alina's authority was permanent. Every employee on the floor had just witnessed her helplessness and his competence. They had seen the real engineer. The client left, appeased for now, with a promise of the proper repair within 2 days. The factory returned to a semblance of normal work, but the atmosphere was charged. Alex stood by the machine in quiet conversation with Frank. Elena approached them, the dynamics between them forever altered. "The job is yours," she said to Alex, the formal words feeling absurd. "We'll draft the paperwork for the apprenticeship program." Alex nodded. "I'll start Monday." He began gathering the few tools he'd used. "You could have asked for more," Elena said, a strange note in her voice. It wasn't gratitude, it was confusion. "You could have asked for a fortune, a consultant's fee in the tens of thousands. Why didn't you?" Alex zipped up his worn tool bag. He looked at her, and for the first time she saw a glimpse of the brilliant, passionate engineer he must have been before the world wore him down. Because today wasn't about getting rich, Ms. Vance. It was about getting respect and making sure the people who come after me don't have to sit in that chair for 3 hours to prove they deserve it. He slung the bag over his shoulder. "I have to go pick up my daughter from school." He walked off the factory floor, past the silent, watching workers, and out the same door he'd entered hours earlier as a supplicant. He left as the savior. Elena Vance was left standing amidst the hum of the machine he'd brought back from the brink, surrounded by employees who now knew a truth she was just beginning to grasp, that the most dangerous assumption you can make is that the person with the least apparent power has nothing of value to offer. But the story doesn't end with a fixed machine and a moral lesson. Because while Alex Chen was riding the bus across town to Chloe's school, and Elena Vance was in her office staring blankly at the HR forms for a new apprenticeship program, a different kind of spark was igniting. A junior technician, emboldened by what he'd seen, had filmed the entire final act on his phone, from Alex's calm diagnosis to the machine roaring back to life. And with a few taps, he sent it to a friend with a caption that would change everything. "You won't believe what just happened at work. The boss humiliated a job applicant, then he turned out to be the guy who built the machine that was breaking. Watch this." The video didn't just go viral, it became a cultural litmus test for every worker who had ever felt invisible, and a live grenade in the pocket of Elena Vance's public image. Within 2 hours, the shaky phone footage had been uploaded to a forum for manufacturing professionals. The caption did the rest. "CEO makes job applicant wait 3 hours, then he fixes the machine she bought but can't understand. The applicant built the machine." By 6 p.m., it had been shared on 3 major social media platforms. By 9, it had 1 million views. The algorithm, always hungry for narratives of unjust humiliation and poetic justice, feasted. Comment sections erupted. Former Vance employees emerged from the shadows, sharing stories of abrupt layoffs, of being replaced by cheaper contractors, of Elena's infamous efficiency reviews. Engineers across the industry recognized Alex's name. "Holy crap, that's Alex Chen. He designed the dampening system on the Atlas line. Norwood let him go," one comment read. Another said, "I worked with him. Brilliant mind. This is what happens when you treat knowledge as disposable." The story was no longer confined to a factory floor. It became a shorthand for a broken contract, the disrespect of expertise, the cruelty of the hiring process, the myth of the self-made disruptor who actually just cannibalizes the work of others. Elena discovered the video the next morning, a Sunday, through a frantic call from her public relations director. Her first reaction was cold fury, a violation. Someone in her company had filmed without consent, had exposed internal strife. Her second reaction was visceral panic. She watched the 60-second clip, seeing herself from the unflattering angle of a phone held low. She saw her own stiff posture, her dismissive gestures before the crisis. She saw Alex's calm competence. The edit was brutal. It cut straight from her looking annoyed at his presence to him saving her factory. The narrative was sealed, arrogant boss, humble genius. She spent the day with her PR team crafting a response. They drafted a sterile statement about an internal misunderstanding and valuing all applicants. Elena read it and knew it was dead on arrival. The internet had tried her and found her guilty. The more she tried to control it, the worse it would get. By Sunday evening, business journalists had picked it up. Headlines blared, "The automation trap. What happens when you fire the engineer who built your future?" And viral video exposes the human cost of lean manufacturing. Her investors began calling. Their questions weren't about the client order, they were about brand toxicity and operational stability. Meanwhile, Alex Chen was trying to have a normal Sunday with Chloe. They were at the library, checking out books for her school project, when his old, battered phone began to buzz incessantly. Unknown numbers, text messages from people he hadn't spoken to in years. "Hey man, saw the video, you're a legend." A former colleague from Norwood. "Alex, is that really you? Are you okay?" Then an email from a reporter at a major tech publication requesting an interview. He ignored them all, a knot of anxiety tightening in his stomach. This was the opposite of what he wanted. He didn't want to be a symbol. He wanted a quiet job, stability, anonymity. The video felt like a violation of the fragile peace he'd just negotiated. Chloe looked up from her picture book. "Daddy, your phone is being loud." "It's nothing, sweetheart, just some work stuff." But it wasn't nothing. The attention was a vortex and it was pulling him in. When he dropped Chloe off at her mother that evening, Linda was waiting at the door, her arms crossed. She'd seen the video. "What were you thinking, Alex? Getting into a public fight like that? This affects Chloe too." "I wasn't fighting, I was fixing a machine," he said, weary. "Well, now you're internet famous. Do you know what that means? People will dig. They'll find out about us, about our situation." Her fear was sharp, personal. The spotlight felt like a threat. The real escalation began on Monday morning. Alex arrived at Vance Precision for his first official day, as promised. The atmosphere was electric and divided. Some workers nodded at him with newfound respect, even awe. Others avoided his gaze, nervous about being associated with the troublemaker who'd embarrassed the boss. Frank met him at the time clock, handing him a set of keys and a security badge. "Brace yourself," Frank muttered. "She's called an all-hands meeting in 10 minutes. This is about the video." The entire staff gathered in the warehouse section near the now-quiet Atlas 10. Elena Vance stood on a small platform, looking as if she hadn't slept. The confident aura was gone, replaced by a strained, brittle energy. She didn't mention the video directly at first. She talked about the company's commitment to excellence, about moving forward from last week's challenges. Then her eyes found Alex in the crowd. "Some of you may have seen unauthorized footage circulating online," she said, her voice tight. "Let me be clear. The dissemination of proprietary internal footage is a violation of company policy and will be dealt with severely. Our focus must remain on our work, not on internet gossip." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. It was the wrong tone. It was defensive, threatening. It framed the employees as potential leakers, not as a team. Alex felt dozens of eyes flick toward him, waiting for his reaction. He kept his face neutral. Then Elena dropped the second bombshell. "In light of recent events, and to ensure the security of our intellectual property, all employees will be required to sign updated non-disclosure and social media agreements. These will be available at HR by the end of the day. Failure to sign will be considered voluntary resignation." The silence this time was shocked, then angry. This was a lockdown, a punishment for the entire factory because of one video. Alex saw Frank's jaw tighten. He saw the young technician who'd likely filmed it pale dramatically. Elena wasn't finished. "Furthermore, while we appreciate the assistance provided last week, all major system repairs and diagnostics will now require prior approval from my office. We cannot have ad hoc modifications to million-dollar equipment." This was a direct clawback of the authority she'd been forced to cede to Alex and Frank. She was rebuilding her wall of control, brick by legalistic brick. The meeting disbanded in a cloud of resentment. As people shuffled back to their stations, Alex felt a hand on his arm. It was Frank. "She's scared," Frank said quietly, "and scared bosses make stupid, petty decisions. Watch your back." Alex's first task was a routine inspection of the Atlas 10 to plan the proper manifold replacement. But when he approached the machine, he found a new lock on the engineering terminal cabinet, a physical padlock. He went to the supply closet for the bolt cutters Frank said were there. They were gone. When he asked the shift supervisor for access, the man shrugged nervously. Ms. Vance's orders, all non-scheduled maintenance on the Atlas needs, a work order signed by her. The trap was closing. He had the job, but he was being systematically prevented from doing the very work he was hired for. The apprenticeship program paperwork, he discovered, had been kicked to legal for review, corporate speak for indefinite delay. This was the wait, it gets worse moment. The public victory was hollow. The private reality was a slow, suffocating counterattack. Alex was being paid to be a mascot, a living piece of PR damage control, while being quietly muzzled. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. That afternoon, the email arrived. It was from the general counsel at Norwood Industrial, Alex's former employer. The subject line was, "Urgent, cease and desist and intellectual property notice." Alex's blood ran cold. He opened it. The legal language was dense, but the core message was clear. Norwood had seen the video. They recognized their proprietary software patch being deployed on the Atlas 10 at Vance Precision. The patch Alex had written was still Norwood's intellectual property, covered by the invention agreement he'd signed when he was hired years ago. By using it at a competitor's facility, he had potentially violated that agreement and misappropriated trade secrets. The letter demanded he cease all use of Norwood IP immediately and preserve all relevant data for a potential lawsuit. It was copied to Elena Vance. This was catastrophic. It wasn't just about his job anymore. This was about a legal battle he could never afford. Norwood had deep pockets and angry lawyers. They were likely furious that their own failed cost-cutting on the manifold had been exposed by their former engineer on a public stage. This was their retaliation. Elena summoned him to her office within minutes of receiving her copy. The legal letter was printed out on her desk. Her earlier defiance was gone, replaced by a new, more profound fear, litigation. "What is this?" she demanded, pointing at the letter. "You used stolen software in my machine." "It's not stolen," Alex said, his own anger rising. "I wrote it. It was a diagnostic patch for a flaw I identified. It's in the system logs from my time at Norwood." "But they own it," Elena shot back. "Don't you understand? They can sue me. They can sue you into oblivion. This isn't a feel-good viral story anymore, Chen. This is a corporate war, and you just brought the artillery to my doorstep." The power dynamics had shifted again, but into something uglier and more dangerous. They were no longer just boss and employee, or even adversary and savior. They were potential co-defendants in a multi-million-dollar intellectual property lawsuit. Their fates were now legally entangled. "You need to fix this," Elena said, her voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "You need to make this go away. Talk to them. Retract something. I don't care. If they sue, the apprenticeship program is dead. Frank's job is dead. Your job is dead. Everything from last week is undone." Alex left her office feeling the walls of the world pressing in. The video had given him a moment of power, but it had also painted a target on his back for a much bigger, more ruthless opponent. He was caught between a vengeful former employer and a panicked current one. The quiet stability he'd fought for was further away than ever. That night, as he sat in his dim apartment, researching intellectual property law on his old laptop, a different notification popped up. A direct message on a professional networking site. It was from the lead engineer of the electric vehicle company, the skeptical client who had been ready to walk out. The message read, "Mr. Chen, I was impressed with your work under pressure. Your understanding of that system is clearly unique. My CEO saw the video. He was also impressed. We are establishing a new division focused on sustainable, ethical manufacturing partnerships. We are looking for a director of engineering integrity, someone to vet our suppliers not just on cost, but on how they treat their people and their technology. The salary is 3 times what Vance is paying you. We'd like to talk discreetly." Alex stared at the screen. This was the pivot, the way out, not just from Vance Precision, but from the entire cycle of desperation. It was validation on a scale he'd never dreamed of. It was also a minefield. Accepting it would look like he'd orchestrated the whole viral drama for personal gain. It would confirm Elena's worst suspicions and abandon Frank and the promises he'd fought for. It would mean walking away from the very problems he'd just forced to the surface. But it would secure Chloe's future. He had 24 hours to give the EV company an answer. 24 hours before the legal storm from Norwood likely broke. 24 hours to decide whether to be a martyr for a principle or a father who finally provided security. He closed his laptop and looked at the picture of Chloe on his bedside table, her gap-toothed smile. The future she deserved was in one direction, the justice he believed in was in another, and in the center of it all, the machine he built hummed quietly in a factory across town, waiting to see what its creator would do next. The private battle was over. The public saga was just beginning. And the choice Alex Chen made next would define not just his own story, but the story everyone thought they already knew. Alex Chen did not sleep that night. He sat at his small kitchen table with two pieces of paper, the cease and desist letter from Norwood and the printed job offer from the electric vehicle company. The numbers on the offer were staggering. It represented security, a future where he didn't calculate the cost of everything, where Chloe could have the glasses she needed without a payment plan. It was everything he'd been fighting for since the layoff. But the price was walking away from Frank, who had risked his own position to speak the truth, walking away from the other workers at Vance who had watched him stand up to Elena, walking away from the apprenticeship program that didn't exist yet but felt like a promise he'd made to his younger self, to all the kids who loved gears and code but didn't have connections. Accepting the offer felt like admitting that the system could only be escaped, not changed. As dawn broke, he made his decision, but it wasn't the one anyone expected. He arrived at Vance Precision at 7 a.m. before most of the day's shift. He went straight to Frank's small office in the maintenance bay. Frank was already there, drinking coffee and looking at a parts manifest. "You look like hell," Frank grunted. "I need a favor," Alex said. "A big one, and I need you to trust me." Frank listened as Alex laid out his plan. It was audacious. It was risky. It required Frank to do something that went against every instinct of self-preservation he'd developed working for Elena Vance. When Alex finished, Frank was silent for a full minute. Then he set down his coffee cup. "You're sure about this?" "No," Alex admitted, "but I'm sure about why I'm doing it." Frank nodded slowly. "All right, I'm in. Let's go light the fuse." Their first move was to bypass Elena entirely. Alex called the lead engineer at the electric vehicle company, the one who'd sent the job offer, but he didn't accept the position. Instead, he proposed a different arrangement. He explained the situation at Vance, the legal threat, the stifled apprenticeship program, the culture of fear. Then he made his counter-proposal. What if the EV company became the catalyst for the change instead of the escape route? What if they used their position as Vance's largest client to mandate the changes Alex had fought for as a condition of their continued business? They could require Vance to establish a verified apprenticeship program with the local college. They could require that Frank be given full operational authority over equipment maintenance. They could require transparent reporting on workforce development. In exchange, Alex would consult with them directly on their supplier vetting process, helping them identify other companies with hidden expertise and toxic cultures. He would work for them, but on his terms, as a consultant focusing on ethical engineering partnerships. The EV company's CEO, a man who'd built his brand on sustainability and social responsibility, loved it. It was better PR than just hiring the viral hero. It was a story of partnership and systemic change. They agreed immediately. Then came the harder part, Norwood. Alex didn't have a law firm on retainer. What he had was evidence. Years of emails, design logs, and meeting notes saved on his old laptop. He compiled a dossier showing that the cooling manifold flaw had been identified and documented by his team, that management had overridden their safety specification for cost reasons, and that his diagnostic patch was written specifically as a safety workaround for a known, dangerous defect. He didn't send it to Norwood's lawyers. He sent it to a journalist at the tech publication who'd been emailing him with a clear, factual explanation of what had happened. The story broke at noon. The headline read, "Cost Cutting Over Safety." how Norwood's greed created a viral manufacturing crisis. It reframed the entire narrative. Alex wasn't a rogue engineer stealing IP, he was a whistleblower using his own safety fix to prevent a disaster that Norwood's negligence had created. The article included quotes from two other former Norwood engineers who confirmed the story. The public sentiment, already primed by the viral video, swung hard against Norwood. By 2 p.m., Norwood's legal department sent a new email. The cease and desist was under review. By 4 p.m., it was quietly withdrawn. The last thing Norwood needed was a discovery process that would expose more of their cost-cutting decisions. They backed down completely. Now came the confrontation with Elena. Alex and Frank requested a meeting with her and the head of HR. They brought the EV company's new supplier requirements with them. Elena sat behind her desk, looking hollowed out. The negative press, the legal scare, the constant internal tension had taken their toll. Alex didn't sit. He placed the supplier requirements document on her desk. This is from our largest client. These are now the conditions of their continued business with Vance Precision. Elena scanned the document. Her eyes widened as she saw the specifics: the apprenticeship program, Frank's authority, regular ethics audits. She looked up at Alex, betrayal and fury in her eyes. "You did this. You went behind my back to my own client." "I gave you a chance to do it yourself," Alex said calmly. "You chose to lock down the factory and silence your workers instead. This isn't revenge, Ms. Vance. This is consequence management. You can either implement these changes and keep your biggest contract, or you can refuse and explain to your board why you lost 40% of your revenue." Frank spoke for the first time. "The workers are with us on this, Elena. They're tired of being treated like disposable parts. You can be the CEO who adapts or the one who gets left behind." Elena Vance, the disruptor, was being disrupted by the very market forces she claimed to master. The choice was no longer hers. She had no leverage. The viral video had stripped her of her narrative control. The client mandates stripped her of her operational control. She was left with a title and a decision that was really no decision at all. She signed the authorization for the apprenticeship program that afternoon. The changes didn't happen overnight, but they happened. Frank was officially named Director of Plant Operations with a seat at the management table. The first cohort of 5 apprentices from the local technical college started the following month. They were paid, they were mentored, and they worked alongside experienced machinists. The culture at Vance began slowly to shift from one of fear to one of cautious collaboration. Alex did not take a full-time position at Vance. He accepted the consulting role with the EV company, working remotely on a flexible schedule that let him be there when Chloe got home from school. The salary was life-changing. He moved them to a better apartment, bought Chloe the glasses she needed, and opened a college savings account. He was finally able to breathe. But the most surprising detail, the one that never made it into the viral video or the follow-up news stories, came 6 months later. Alex was reviewing schematics for a new supplier when his phone buzzed. It was an email from Elena Vance. The subject line was, "A request." He opened it, expecting more corporate friction. Instead, it was a personal message. "Mr. Chen," it began, "I've been reviewing the first quarter reports from the apprenticeship program. The metrics are good. The students are engaged. Frank tells me one of them just proposed a modification to a grinding sequence that reduced waste by 8%. It occurred to me that I never asked the right question. I was always asking, what does this cost? And how fast can it run? I never asked, what does this person know that I don't?" She went on to write that she had enrolled anonymously in an introductory engineering course at the same community college sponsoring the apprentices. She wanted to understand the machines, not just as assets, but as systems. "You were right," she wrote. "I bought a future I didn't understand. I'm trying to understand it now. I would value your recommendation for further reading if you're willing to give it." Alex read the email 3 times. This wasn't a public apology crafted by a PR team. This was a private, vulnerable admission from a woman who had built her identity on being the smartest person in the room, finally realizing she wasn't. He felt no triumph, only a faint, unexpected thread of sympathy. He wrote back a brief, professional email with a reading list of foundational engineering texts. He signed it, Alex. The story that had begun with a public humiliation ended with a private education. The machine, the Atlas 10, now ran with a proper, upgraded cooling manifold. It was maintained by a team that included both veteran machinists and eager apprentices. It produced quality parts. The viral video faded from the front page of the internet, replaced by the next outrage, the next hero. But in the world it briefly illuminated, real, tangible changes had taken root. Alex still sometimes visited the Vance facility to consult with Frank. On one of these visits, he passed the waiting area where he'd sat for 3 hours. The plastic chairs were still there. He paused, looking at them. A young apprentice, recognizing him, stopped and said, "Hey, you're Alex Chen. My instructor talks about you. That was wild, what happened here." Alex smiled slightly. It was something. "Is it true you made the CEO go to school?" the apprentice asked, half joking. Alex thought of Alina's email. "I think she decided to go herself," he said. "That's the part that matters." He finished his meeting with Frank and walked out of the factory. The late afternoon sun was warm on his face. He checked his phone. There was a text from Chloe's teacher with a photo of Chloe presenting her science project, a simple model of a pulley system. She was beaming with pride. Underneath, the teacher had written, "She told the class her daddy is an engineer who fixes big robots. She said you taught her that understanding how things work is a superpower." Alex got into his car, a reliable used sedan he'd been able to pay for in cash. He drove toward Chloe's school, the weight of the past 2 years finally lifting. He had not just fixed a machine. He had, in his own small, stubborn way, helped fix a broken system. He had proven that expertise could not be permanently dismissed, that dignity was non-negotiable, and that sometimes the most powerful tool an engineer possesses isn't a wrench or a line of code, but the refusal to believe that people, or their knowledge, are disposable. The viral video had given him a platform, but his choices after the cameras stopped rolling were what built his future. He chose partnership over escape, transparency over secrecy, and building people up over tearing systems down. And in doing so, he transformed a story of revenge into a blueprint for something much rarer, redemption. As he pulled into the school parking lot, he saw Chloe waiting on the steps, her backpack almost as big as she was. She saw his car and waved excitedly. In that moment, Alex Chen knew the true value of everything he'd fought for. It wasn't in a paycheck or a job title. It was in the secure, hopeful smile of a 7-year-old girl who believed her daddy could fix anything. And for the first time in a very long time, he believed it too. So what does this story, which captivated millions with its satisfying twist of justice, actually leave us with when the screen goes dark? Beyond the dopamine hit of seeing the arrogant humbled and the humble exalted, it reveals a far more uncomfortable and enduring truth about our world. We have built systems that are brilliant at measuring output and efficiency, but often utterly blind to true value. We celebrate the disruptors who move fast and break things, but rarely stop to ask who is left picking up the pieces, or what knowledge is shattered in the process. Alex Chen's story is not an anomaly, it is a symptom. In every industry, there are experts who have been made invisible by restructuring, by automation, by the simple, corrosive belief that experience is a cost to be minimized rather than an asset to be cultivated. They are the engineers, the nurses, the teachers, the craftspeople, the ones who hold the institutional memory and the practical wisdom in their hands. We meet them not in boardrooms, but in waiting rooms, in break rooms, in the quiet moments before they are overlooked. The viral video gave us a fantasy, the instant public vindication, but the real story was what happened after the views plateaued. The hard, unglamorous work of building a better system, Frank mentoring apprentices, Alex choosing constructive leverage over lucrative escape, even Alina in her private shame beginning the humbling work of actually learning. This is the less shareable, more important sequel. Justice isn't a moment, it's a process. Dignity isn't given in a climax, it's built through daily respect. The lingering question for all of us is this: how many Alex Chens are sitting in the waiting rooms of our own lives? How often do we mistake someone's current position for their potential, their quiet patience for a lack of power, their worn jacket for a lack of worth? The machines we depend on, the systems that deliver our food, our goods, our healthcare, they were all built by someone, and they are all maintained by someone. The real risk is that the machine breaks. The real risk is that we forget who understands it and why their knowledge matters more than any algorithm. This story is a reminder that expertise is not a credential you can automate away. It is a living thing, born of curiosity, honed by failure, and carried in the minds of people who care about more than the bottom line. It is the single father thinking of his daughter's glasses, the old machinist remembering how a vibration should feel, the CEO finally opening a textbook to understand what she owns. When we protect that, when we invest in it, we don't just prevent breakdowns, we build a future that works for everyone. So the next time you see someone being overlooked, remember the plastic chair. Remember that the quietest person in the room might hold the key to the thing everyone thinks is broken. And the next time you find yourself in a position of power, ask yourself the question Elena Vance finally learned to ask. What does this person know that I do? The answer might just save you. If you found this story of hidden value and quiet courage meaningful, make sure to subscribe. We explore the real people and unseen forces shaping our world, one human truth at a time. Thanks for listening.